My life has always been a sequence of protocols, traditions, and expectations that suffocated me like the scorching heat of the Saudi desert. I'm Khalil al-Rashid, the second prince of the royal house, and at 28 I already knew exactly how my existence would unfold until my last breath. An arranged marriage, producing heirs, perpetuating a lineage that considered my personal happiness a disposable luxury. For decades, I played the part of the perfect prince, an Oxford scholar, fluent in 6 languages, skilled in diplomatic negotiations, and completely empty inside. My father, King Abdullah, molded me to be an extension of his will, a political instrument dressed in silk and gold. My every gesture was calculated, every word weighed in the scales of family reputation. The weight of ancient traditions intensified when my father announced my marriage to Princess Layla, the daughter of an allied sheikh, a union that would seal commercial and political alliances. But for me, it represented the definitive end of any hope for an authentic life. Because there's a secret I carry like a dangerous flame in my chest. My attraction to men. Something unthinkable and punishable in my world. If you want to find out how a casual encounter can challenge centuries of royal traditions, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The nights in Riyadh became unbearable. I walked through the palace's marble corridors like a ghost, watching the wedding preparations approaching like an inevitable storm. Servants scurried back and forth organizing details for a week-long celebration, while I felt more and more like a prisoner in my own home. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories, with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. My routine was mathematically precise. Wake up at 5 for prayers, a formal breakfast discussing matters of state, administrative meetings about oil business, a formal lunch, studies of Islamic jurisprudence, supervised physical exercise, and a family dinner where every conversation revolved around the wedding preparations. The palace, with its lush gardens and crystal-clear fountains, had turned into a gilded cage. Every room echoed with conversations about bridal veils, banquets, international guest lists, and matrimonial contracts. I smiled and agreed mechanically, but inside, I felt like I was being prepared for my own funeral. The only breaks in this oppressive routine were stolen moments in the private library, where I'd lose myself in books about distant cultures and philosophies that questioned established traditions. There, surrounded by thousands of volumes, I allowed my mind to wander to places where I could maybe just be Khalil, not Prince al-Rashid. It was during one of those suffocating afternoons, while pretending to study commercial contracts but actually reading about Moorish architecture in Andalusia, that a desperate idea began to germinate. I needed to escape, even temporarily, from that environment where every breath was monitored and every thought had to serve the interests of the crown. I summoned my courage and sought out my father during one of his private audiences. The golden throne he sat on seemed to swallow any trace of human warmth from the room. "Father," I began with the firmest voice I could muster, "I'd like to take a cultural trip before the wedding, to Granada, in Spain, to study the Islamic heritage in Europe." King Abdullah watched me with his penetrating eyes, as if he could read every hidden thought in my mind. "Why Granada?" he asked, with the grave voice he used to interrogate suspicious diplomats. I took a deep breath. The Alhambra represents the peak of Islamic civilization in Europe. As a future leader, I must understand how our culture has influenced the world. It would be an educational journey that would enrich my perspective before I take on my marital responsibilities. The silence stretched for minutes that felt like hours. Finally, he nodded. 2 weeks. Mahmoud will accompany you for security. Mahmoud had been my personal bodyguard for 10 years, a loyal and discreet man who knew every one of my unspoken secrets. 2 weeks. 14 days of freedom before I definitively surrendered to a life of organized lies. It seemed like so little, but for someone who had never made a decision that was truly his own, it was like winning a treasure. The trip to Granada was my first real experience of anonymity. Sitting on the private plane, watching the clouds through the window, I felt a mix of terror and ecstasy. For the first time in 28 years, I was going to a place where no one knew me, where I could walk the streets without protocols, where maybe I could discover who I really was beneath the layers of royal expectations. When the plane landed at Granada's airport, the Mediterranean air greeted me with a lightness that contrasted brutally with the oppressive weight of the Saudi desert. Mahmoud stayed a respectful distance away while I took a deep breath, savoring the taste of freedom for the first time in decades, even if it was temporary. The hotel I stayed in was in the historic center, near the cathedral. I deliberately chose a modest place, far from the luxurious establishments where royals usually stayed. I wanted to blend in, to just be another tourist exploring an ancient city. The first few days in Granada were a complete sensory revelation. I'd wake up without a fixed schedule, walk through the narrow stone streets that wound like ancient veins, listening to the echo of my footsteps mixed with the murmur of conversations in Spanish. The aroma of spices floated in the air, mixed with the scent of jasmine blooming from flowered balconies. I established a delightfully simple routine, mornings exploring different neighborhoods, afternoons getting lost in the labyrinths of the Albaicín, and nights sitting on terraces watching the movement of people living their lives without the weight of imaginary crowns. For the first time, no one was watching me, calculating my every move. No one was interpreting every word as a political statement. The feeling of anonymity was intoxicating. I sat in small cafes, drank mint tea, while watching Andalusians chat animatedly about football, family, weekend plans. Completely mundane subjects that sounded like heavenly music to me. A world existed where people worried about simple things, where happiness didn't depend on political alliances or strategic marriages. I visited the Alhambra on the third day, but I got lost trying to find a less crowded entrance. The complex of palaces and gardens was immense, and I had underestimated its size. I walked in circles for nearly an hour under the Andalusian sun, my linen shirt sticking to my sweaty body. When I realized I was completely disoriented, I stopped in a shaded corner, frustrated with my own inability to navigate a city I should have been exploring with ease. It was then that a warm voice approached me in English with a musical Spanish accent. "Necesita ayuda, señor?" I turned and saw a man who looked like he had been sculpted by the Mediterranean sun itself. Tall, with tanned skin that glowed in the natural light, slightly wavy brown hair that danced in the gentle breeze, and brown eyes so expressive they seemed to hold entire stories. His smile was genuine, without the artificiality I was used to in diplomatic interactions. "Yes, I'm actually a bit lost," I admitted, feeling a strange vulnerability in confessing my disorientation to a complete stranger. "I'm trying to get to the north entrance of the Alhambra." He laughed, and the sound was like fresh water on a scorching day. "Ah, that entrance is closed for renovation. I'm Diego Morales, a tour guide. I can show you the best route." Diego. The name sounded familiar on my lips when I repeated it to myself. There was something about his naturalness, the way he spoke about Granada with evident passion, that intrigued me immediately. I was used to people who measured every word, who calculated every interaction. Diego was the complete opposite, spontaneous, authentic, vibrant. "I'm Khalil," I replied, deliberately omitting any title. For the first time in years, I introduced myself just as myself, without the weight of an ancient dynasty. "Khalil," he repeated, testing the sound. "Arabic name, right? First time in Granada?" I confirmed it, and something in the sparkle of his eyes told me I had found more than just a tour guide. Diego radiated an energy I had never experienced, as if he lived every moment intensely, as if every day was an adventure waiting to be discovered. "Well, Khalil, forget the traditional tours. I'm going to show you the real Granada, the one that lives and breathes beyond the monuments." His proposal surprised me. I was used to meticulously planned itineraries, schedules approved by security advisors, guided tours that followed rigid diplomatic protocols. Diego offered something completely different: authenticity. "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely curious. "The monuments are beautiful, but Granada isn't just old stones. It's the people, the traditions, the flavors, the sounds. Do you want to get to know the city the way we do?" I looked around, searching for Mahmoud, who was keeping a discreet but ever-present distance. For a moment, I considered politely declining and following my original itinerary. But something about Diego's proposal, the promise of experiencing Granada through the eyes of someone who truly loved it, made me nod in agreement. "I accept," I said, and those two words sounded like a declaration of freedom. Diego's smile widened, transforming his whole face. "Perfect. But first, let's grab a bite to eat. You can't explore Granada on an empty stomach." He led me through streets I would never have discovered on my own. Narrow paths that wound between ancient buildings like secrets guarded by the city itself. We talked along the way, and I found out that Diego had grown up in Granada, the son of a ceramic artisan and a history teacher. He knew every corner, every legend, every local tradition, as if they were extensions of his own identity. We arrived at a small bar hidden in an alley, the kind of place that didn't appear in tourist guides. The atmosphere was simple but welcoming, with colorful tiles on the walls and the aroma of spices and olive oil permeating the air. Diego greeted the owner like an old friend, and I realized that he truly belonged to that world in a way I had never belonged to mine. "¿Qué le gusta comer?" he asked as we sat at a small table near the window. "Anything," I replied, and I realized it was the first time in years that someone had asked me about my personal preferences without the answer having political or diplomatic implications. Diego ordered a selection of tapas without consulting a menu, talking animatedly with the waiter about ingredients and preparations. I watched how he gestured when he spoke, how his eyes lit up when he described the flavors, how he seemed completely at ease in his own skin. When the food arrived, it was a revelation. Small plates with combinations of flavors I had never experienced. Cured ham that melted on the tongue, aged cheeses that told stories of distant mountains, marinated olives that carried the taste of the Mediterranean sun. Diego explained each dish to me with passion, like a poet describing verses. "In Granada, food is a form of love," he said as he broke a piece of artisanal bread. "Each recipe has a history, each flavor connects generations." As we ate, we talked about cultural differences, about travel, about life philosophies. Diego asked me about my country, but in a genuinely curious way, not with the artificial reverence I was used to. I answered carefully, omitting details about my true position, talking about the desert, about traditions, about the complexity of balancing modernity and tradition. "¿Y qué hace en la vida?" he eventually asked. "Family business," I replied vaguely. "Oil, mainly." "And you? Have you always been a tour guide?" Diego laughed. "Not exactly. I studied art history, but I like showing Granada to people more than writing about it in books that nobody reads. I'd rather see people's eyes light up when they discover something new than impress professors with academic theories." There was something refreshingly honest about the way Diego talked about his life choices. He had chosen happiness over prestige, passion over financial security, authenticity over social expectations. Concepts completely alien to someone raised to put duty above any personal consideration. After lunch, Diego took me to the Albaicín, the historic neighborhood that stretched out like a labyrinth of narrow streets and white houses. We walked slowly, him pointing out architectural details I never would have noticed on my own. Mozarabic tiles hidden in doorways, secret gardens visible through ornate grilles, small mosques converted into chapels after the Christian reconquest. "Granada is like a palimpsest," he explained as he touched an ancient wall. "Each civilization wrote its story over the previous one, but if you know where to look, you can read all the layers." His hands, I noticed, were expressive and careful, as if each touch conveyed respect for the history he was sharing. There were calluses that indicated manual labor, but also a delicacy that suggested artistic sensibility. It was a fascinating contrast to my own hands, too soft from privilege, but too tense from constant pressure. As the afternoon progressed, I realized I was experiencing something completely new. Conversation without a political agenda. Companionship without protocols. Moments lived simply for the pleasure of living them. Diego didn't treat me like an important figure who needed to be impressed, but like a genuinely interesting person with whom it was worth spending time. We stopped at the Mirador de San Nicolás when the sun began to set. The view of the Alhambra bathed in the golden light of dusk was stunning, but I noticed that my attention was divided between the historic monument and the man beside me, who was watching the scene with a satisfied smile, as if he never tired of that view. "Impresionante, verdad?" Diego said. "Every day is different. The light changes, the clouds create different shadows, but the magic remains. Don't you ever get tired of seeing this?" I asked. "Never," he answered without hesitation. "It's like asking someone if they get tired of breathing. Granada is a part of me, and I'm a part of it." I discreetly sent a message to Mahmoud informing him that I'd be back at the hotel late. It was the first time I had spontaneously changed my plans without consulting security protocols, and the feeling was both terrifying and liberating. When the stars began to appear in the Andalusian sky, Diego suggested we have dinner somewhere else special he knew. I accepted without hesitation, realizing that every yes I said to him was a small act of rebellion against a lifetime of duties and obligations. The restaurant was even more intimate than the bar at lunch, hidden in an inner courtyard with a small fountain in the center and grapevines that created a natural ceiling. Diego ordered local wines and traditional dishes, explaining the history of each recipe as if they were legends passed down through generations. During dinner, our conversations deepened. Diego talked about his dreams of traveling the world, of getting to know other cultures, of maybe writing a book about the historical connections between different Mediterranean civilizations. I shared, cautiously, my fascination with Islamic architecture, my frustration with traditions that sometimes seem to suffocate innovation, my feeling of being caught between worlds. A vases, Diego said thoughtfully. Traditions protect us, but other times they imprison us. The key is knowing which ones to honor and which ones to change. His words resonated deeply with me. Here was someone who had found a balance between respecting his heritage and living authentically. He hadn't rejected his culture, but he also hadn't become a slave to it. When we finally said goodbye that first night, Diego handed me his card. If you want to get to know more of authentic Granada tomorrow, call me. But only if you really want to get to know it, not just visit. I returned to the hotel with my mind buzzing with new thoughts and sensations. For the first time in years, I had spent entire hours without thinking about royal obligations, arranged marriages, or family expectations. I had simply existed, talked, laughed, discovered. I looked at my reflection in the hotel room mirror and saw something different in my eyes. A sparkle that wasn't there in the morning. It was as if a few hours in Diego's company had awakened a part of me that I had kept dormant for decades. I held his card between my fingers, reading and rereading the contact information. I knew that calling would mean more than hiring a tour guide. It would be choosing adventure over security, authenticity over protection, possibility over predetermination. In the following days, Diego became my gateway to a Granada that existed beyond the must-see tourist spots. He took me to artisan workshops where men with calloused hands created ceramics with techniques that had spanned centuries. He translated entire conversations for me about ancestral techniques, about family pride, about the satisfaction of creating beauty with your own hands. We visited local markets where Diego taught me how to choose fruits, how to distinguish spices, how to bargain with vendors who treated him like a beloved nephew. Each interaction revealed layers of a community where people really knew each other, cared about each other, lived interconnected lives in ways that my royal isolation had never allowed me to experience. One afternoon he took me to his father's workshop, a ceramist whose family had perfected Mozarabic techniques for 5 generations. The older man received me with the same warm hospitality as his son, offering me mint tea as he explained the secrets of his creations. Mi padre says that hands tell stories that words can't, Diego translated as we watched the artisan shape clay into impossible forms. Each piece carries a little of the soul of the one who makes it. I watched the experienced hands transform raw matter into art, and I wondered what stories my own hands would tell. What legacy was I creating besides perpetuating traditions that others had established centuries before I was born? Diego noticed my thoughtful expression. "En qué piensa?" he asked gently. "On the difference between creating something new and just maintaining something old," I replied honestly. He watched me for a moment before answering. "The two things can be important, but I believe that preserving without creating is like breathing without living." His words settled deep inside my chest, echoing truths I had felt but had never been able to articulate. I was starting to understand that my entire life had been about preservation, of traditions, of alliances, of power structures, but never about creating something genuinely mine. As the days passed, I realized I was developing not just an affection for Granada, but a deep connection with Diego that went beyond simple gratitude for his hospitality. There was something about the way he laughed, the way he gestured when telling stories, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about the things he loved, that awakened feelings I had suppressed for so long I had almost forgotten they existed. But along with that discovery came a growing anguish. In 1 week, I would be back in Riyadh, once again wearing the clothes of the perfect prince, walking toward a wedding that would represent the end of any possibility of authenticity. How could I go back to that life after having tasted freedom? My father's calls became more frequent, his questions about my studies more detailed. I lied with increasing ease, creating fictional reports about architectural research and cultural analyses, when in reality, I was spending my days discovering parts of myself I didn't know existed. Diego, in turn, began to notice my growing melancholy, my tendency to avoid subjects about the future, my evasive response whenever he asked about my life back home. There were moments when I saw him watching me with a questioning expression, as if he were trying to decipher a mystery I carried. One afternoon, as we walked through the General Life Gardens, he finally addressed the subject directly. "Khalil, hay algo que no me estás contando? You seem, I don't know, like you're running away from something." The question hit me like a dagger. I stopped walking and looked at him, seeing genuine concern in his brown eyes. How could I explain that I was running from a lifetime, from ancient expectations, from a destiny that had been imposed on me before I was even born. It's complicated, I murmured, unable to find the right words. Important things are always complicated, he replied gently. But sometimes, sharing the complication makes it easier to understand. At that moment, surrounded by the ancient beauty of the water gardens and the genuine warmth of Diego's concern, I felt a desperate need to tell the truth. But how could I explain to someone who lived with such freedom what it meant to be the property of a dynasty, a political commodity dressed in privilege? My family has very specific expectations for my life, I began carefully. Expectations that don't include personal freedom. Diego remained silent, waiting for me to continue. The patience in his expression encouraged me to go on. There's an arranged marriage waiting for me, a whole life planned by other people, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to live that way. It was the first time I had verbalized my fears, my hopelessness, my feeling of powerlessness in the face of the destiny that awaited me. The words came out shaky, loaded with years of forced silence. Diego watched me for a long moment before speaking. ¿Y qué quieres tú, Khalil? Not what your family wants, not what others expect. What do you want? The question was simple, but terrifying. It had been so long since I had considered my own desires that I had almost forgotten they existed. I looked at Diego, at his eyes full of life and possibilities, and for the first time in 28 years, I allowed the truth to form into words. I want to live, I whispered. Just live. The confession that had escaped my lips hung in the air between us like a dangerous truth finally set free. Diego watched me with an intensity I had never experienced. Not the calculated gaze of diplomats or the artificial reverence of subjects, but something completely different. His eyes seemed to see through the layers of protection I had built over decades. Khalil, he said softly, taking a step closer. Living isn't just breathing and existing. Living is feeling. It's choosing, it's daring to be who you really are. The garden around us seemed to have been suspended in time. The fountains murmured their eternal melodies. The scent of jasmine floated on the evening breeze. But all my attention was focused on the man in front of me who had asked a question no one ever had. What I really wanted. ¿Sabes qué? Diego continued, his voice charged with a sudden decision. There's a place I want to show you. A special place. He led me through paths I had never taken. Streets, even narrower, that wound through the Albaicín, like secrets guarded by the city itself. We climbed steps worn down by time, passed by whitewashed houses where I could hear soft music and family conversations filtering through open windows. Where are we going? I asked, but Diego just smiled mysteriously. To a place where you can just be Khalil, he replied, without titles, without expectations, without masks. We continued climbing until we reached a small wooden door hidden among ivy. Diego produced an old key and opened it, revealing a secret garden that literally took my breath away. It was small, intimate, surrounded by walls covered in flowering vines. A small fountain bubbled in the center, surrounded by silk cushions arranged on oriental carpets worn by time. This place has belonged to my family for generations, Diego explained, lighting a few candles that were strategically placed throughout the space. My great-grandfather created it as a refuge during the Civil War, a place where people could come to escape the world, to be themselves without fear. The golden light of the candles danced on the ancient walls, creating shadows that transformed the small garden into something magical, almost unreal. The perfume of jasmine intensified with the approaching coolness of the night, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe completely. It's perfect, I murmured, looking around in wonder. Like you, Diego replied simply, and his words hit me like lightning. I turned to face him, and found his eyes fixed on me with an expression that made my heart race. There was something different in the air between us, a tension that had been building for days but was finally being acknowledged. Diego, I began, but he stepped closer, raising a hand to gently touch my face. Khalil, he whispered, from the first day I saw you, I knew you were carrying a weight that didn't belong to you. Your eyes, there's so much sadness in them, but also so much beauty. His touch burned my skin in a way I had never experienced. My entire life, physical contact had been restricted to formal handshakes and ceremonial hugs. But this was different. Intimate, chosen, real. I don't know what secrets you're keeping, Diego continued, his voice hoarse with emotion. But I know you deserve to be happy. You deserve to be loved for who you really are. The words I had held back for 28 years finally found the courage to escape. Diego, there's something about me, something my family, my world, could never accept. Dime, he asked gently, his hand still caressing my face. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff. I've never been with a woman. I've never wanted to be, but I can't admit that in my culture, in my position. The marriage waiting for me is a lie I'll have to live forever. Instead of recoiling, Diego smiled with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. Khalil, my dear lost prince, do you think I didn't know? The way you look at me, how your body responds when I'm near, how you get nervous when other men watch us together. It wasn't hard to tell. He leaned in even closer, our faces now just inches apart. Puedo? He asked, but didn't finish the sentence. In response, I closed the distance between us, pressing my lips against his in a kiss that was simultaneously my first truth and my first lie. A truth to myself, a lie to the world that had shaped me. The kiss started hesitantly, almost reverently, but quickly turned into something deeper, more desperate. Years of denial, of forced self-control, of suppressed desires exploded in that moment. Diego's hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, as if he wanted to completely merge with me. When we finally separated, we were both breathing heavily. Khalil, Diego whispered against my lips, I want to show you what it really means to live. He guided me to the cushions near the fountain, where we sat close enough to feel the warmth emanating from our bodies. The bubbling water created a soft melody that masked the sounds of the distant city, isolating us in our own universe. ¿Estás seguro? Diego asked, his hands tracing gentle paths on my arms. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied, and they were the first completely true words I had spoken in years. Diego slowly began to unbutton my shirt, his agile fingers working each button as if it were a sacred ritual. Every inch of exposed skin tingled under his touch, as if my body was finally waking up from a deep sleep. Eres hermoso, he murmured, as his hands explored my chest, tracing patterns that sent waves of pleasure through every nerve ending. Like a work of art that has finally found the light. When his hands reached the belt of my pants, I hesitated for a moment. The reality of what we were doing, of what this would mean for my carefully constructed life, threatened to pull me back to the surface. But then Diego kissed my neck, whispering words in Spanish that sounded like poetry, and all resistance vanished. Déjame cuidarte, he whispered. Let me show you what it feels like to be desired, to be adored. His hands and lips mapped my body like an explorer discovering a lost continent. Every touch was deliberate, reverent, designed to awaken sensations I didn't even know existed. I groaned when his mouth found sensitive spots that made my body involuntarily arch. Diego, I panted, barely able to form coherent words. Estoy aquí, he replied, his firm hands reassuring me as he continued his exploration. You are safe with me. When we finally came together completely, it was as if every fragmented piece of my soul rearranged itself into a completely new configuration. The movement was slow, almost meditative, as if Diego understood that this wasn't just my first experience with a man, but my first experience with true intimacy. Mírame, he whispered when I tried to close my eyes, overwhelmed by the sensations. I want to see you discover who you really are. His eyes, illuminated by the golden light of the candles, became my anchor as I navigated unknown territories of pleasure and vulnerability. Every movement created waves of sensations that radiated through my body, building towards something I knew would change everything. No tengas miedo, Diego murmured, sensing my tension. Just feel, just live. And then, like a dam finally giving way to accumulated pressure, I let myself go completely. The climax swept over me like a storm, making my body tremble uncontrollably as cries escaped my lips. Diego held me tightly, whispering words of encouragement as I broke apart and came back together in his arms. We stayed intertwined for long minutes afterward, our breathing gradually returning to normal, as the scent of jasmine and the sound of the fountain enveloped us in a bubble of post-ecstasy peace. I traced lazy circles on Diego's chest, my fingers exploring the texture of his skin still damp with sweat. ¿Cómo te sientes?" he asked gently, his fingers combing through my messy hair. Like I was born for the first time, I answered honestly. Like I finally know what it means to be alive. Diego smiled, kissing the top of my head. This is just the beginning, Khalil. There's so much more to discover, so much more to feel. But even wrapped in post-intimacy happiness, reality began to seep back into my consciousness. In less than a week, I would be on a plane back to Riyadh, back to a life that now seemed impossible to bear. How could I go back to that existence after discovering what it really meant to be alive? Diego, I began hesitantly. I need to tell you something. About who I really am. About why I can't just choose to stay here with you. He watched me seriously. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. You don't understand, I whispered, tears beginning to form in my eyes. I'm not just Khalil. I'm Prince Khalil al-Rashid, second in line to the throne of Saudi Arabia. And in 6 days, I'll be married to a woman I barely know, fulfilling a duty that was decided before I was even born. The silence that followed was deafening. Diego watched me for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what I had revealed. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with deep sadness. A prince, he murmured. I should have known. The way you carry yourself, the way you talk, how... It all makes sense now. Diego, please don't let this change. I began, but he silenced me with a soft kiss. It doesn't change what I feel for you, he said firmly. But it changes everything else, doesn't it? I confirmed with a nod, feeling like I was breaking not just my own heart, but his as well. My father gave me 2 weeks. After that, I go home, marry Princess Layla, and take on the responsibilities I was born with. Y si no volvieras? Diego asked quietly. I'd be disowned. My family would disown me. I'd lose everything, title, fortune, position, and more importantly, I'd bring dishonor to a dynasty that has existed for 1,000 years. Diego pulled me closer, as if he could protect me from the cruel reality that awaited us. Pero serías feliz? With you, I'd be the happiest person in the world. But I don't know if I have enough courage to give up everything for happiness. Happiness is the only thing worth risking everything for, Diego replied. But I understand it's more complicated for you. We stayed embraced as the night deepened around us, both of us knowing that we had crossed a line from which there was no return. I had experienced true love, genuine passion, the feeling of being completely accepted for who I was. How could I go back to a life of lies after touching the sky? Khalil, Diego whispered eventually, no matter what happens, I want you to know that these days with you have been the most beautiful of my life. Mine too, I replied, feeling silent tears roll down my face. You showed me who I can be when I'm not trying to be who others expect me to be. Then don't forget that version of yourself, he said, lifting my face to look me in the eyes. No matter where you go or what you do, remember that there is a Khalil who knows what it means to love and be loved. We made love one more time that night, more slowly, more intensely, as if we could somehow imprint the memory of each other onto our souls. Every touch was a farewell and a promise. Every kiss a declaration of love and a prayer for an impossible future. When I finally returned to the hotel in the early hours of the morning, I carried more than just the memory of physical intimacy. I carried the discovery of who I really was when stripped of titles and expectations. Someone capable of loving deeply, of feeling intensely, of living authentically. But I also carried the weight of the impossible choice that awaited me, to honor centuries of tradition, or to fight for my own happiness. And with each passing day, each moment I shared with Diego, that choice became more painful and more urgent. The 5 days that followed were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions that consumed me like fire and ice simultaneously. During the day, Diego and I explored Granada like desperate lovers trying to capture eternity in fleeting moments. We visited places he had saved especially for me. Small, hidden churches where light filtered through ancient stained glass creating rainbows on the stone floor. Secret terraces with impossible views of the city. Intimate corners where we could kiss without fear of curious glances. Each experience was tinged with the sweet agony of knowing it was finite. Diego seemed determined to show me every facet of his city, as if he could somehow implant Granada so deeply in my soul that I could never completely escape its influence. And maybe he was right. Every street we walked together, every dish we shared, every whispered word in Spanish he taught me, became part of a collection of memories that I knew I would carry forever. ¿En qué piensas? Diego asked one afternoon, when he found me silently watching the movement of people in Plaza Nueva. On how everything feels different now, I replied honestly. Like I've spent my whole life seeing the world through a smudged glass and someone has finally cleaned it. He smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. Y ahora tienes que decidir si quieres seguir viendo claramente o volver al vidrio empañado. The metaphor was brutal in its precision, because that was exactly it. A choice between painful clarity and comfortable ignorance, between terrifying truth and familiar lies. My father's calls became daily, then twice a day. His voice carried a growing impatience that made my stomach clench with anxiety. Khalil, the final wedding preparations require your presence. Princess Layla is eager to finalize the arrangements with you. Yes, father, I replied mechanically, lying about imaginary architectural research and cultural reports I would never write. I'm collecting valuable information that will benefit our future development projects. But each lie became harder to utter. How could I explain that I was collecting information about myself, discovering parts of my identity that had been buried under decades of royal conditioning? Diego noticed my growing anguish. During our last night together, although neither of us had said it would be the last, he took me back to the secret garden where it had all begun. The place seemed even more magical than the first time, the candles he lit creating an atmosphere of sacred intimacy. Khalil, he began, sitting close to me on the silk cushions. I have to tell you something important. My heart sped up. What is it? Estoy enamorado de ti, he said simply, his words falling into the space between us like precious stones. Completely, irrevocably in love. And I know you feel the same way about me. The tears I had been holding back for days finally overflowed. Diego, you know I love you. More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone, but Pero vas a irte mañana, he finished for me, his voice heavy with a pain that mirrored my own. I don't know how not to go, I whispered. You don't understand the weight of 1,000 years of tradition, the expectations of an entire kingdom, the responsibility to my family. ¿Y la responsabilidad contigo mismo? Diego asked gently. The responsibility to your own happiness, to your own truth? I don't know if I'm entitled to that, I replied, feeling like I was falling apart. I was born a prince. I didn't choose it, but it's what I am. How can I simply abandon everyone who depends on me for my own selfish happiness? Diego pulled me into his arms, and I allowed myself to cry against his chest as he stroked my hair. Mi amor, he whispered. It's not selfishness to want to live authentically. It's courage. And sometimes, being brave means disappointing the people you love, so you don't betray who you really are. We made love that night with a desperate intensity, as if we could somehow merge our souls so completely that physical separation would become impossible. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a plea, every whisper a prayer directed at gods who seemed determined to keep us apart. No me olvides, Diego whispered, as we lay intertwined after the climax, our bodies still trembling with the echoes of shared pleasure. How could I replied, tracing paths on his skin with trembling fingers. You've become a part of me. No matter where I go, I'll always carry Granada in my heart, because I'll carry you. We slept little that night, preferring to stay awake, memorizing every detail of each other, as if we could build a mental file so detailed that we'd never need the physical presence to feel the love we shared. The morning arrived cruel and relentless. Mahmoud was waiting for me at the hotel with a somber expression. He knew my moods well enough to know that something had fundamentally changed during those 2 weeks. Your Highness, he said respectfully, the car for the airport will be here in an hour. I looked at my packed luggage, at the souvenirs I had bought to keep up appearances, at the fake reports I had created to justify my trip. It all seemed to belong to another person, to a version of me that had died the moment Diego asked what I really wanted. Mahmoud, I said impulsively, have you ever regretted a choice you made? He watched me carefully before answering. Many times, Your Highness. But I regret more the choices I didn't have the courage to make. His words resonated in my chest like a bell. I picked up my phone and dialed Diego's number, my hands trembling as I waited for him to answer. Khalil? His voice sounded raspy, as if he hadn't slept either. Where are you? I asked. At home. Why? Are you leaving already? I need to see you. One last time. Please. Ven aquí, he said simply. I told Mahmoud I needed 1 more hour and ran through the streets of Granada like a man possessed. I found Diego waiting at the door of his apartment, wearing only linen pants, his red eyes suggesting he had cried as much as I had. Khalil, he began, but I silenced him with a desperate kiss. I can't, I whispered against his lips. I can't go back to that life, not after having known this one, not after having known you. ¿Qué estás diciendo? Diego asked, his eyes filling with cautious hope. I'm saying I'm going to lose everything. My title, my fortune, my family. But for the first time in my life, I'm making a choice that is truly mine. I picked up my phone again, this time dialing a number that terrified me more than any other in the world. My father answered on the first ring. Khalil? Why are you calling? Shouldn't you be at the airport? Father, I began, my voice surprisingly firm. I need to tell you something important. I'm not getting on today's flight." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When my father finally spoke, his voice was cold with fury. "Explain yourself. Immediately. I can't marry Princess Layla. I can't live the life that was planned for me. I've found someone I love. Someone who makes me want to be the best version of myself." "Someone?" The word came out as a roar. "Who is she? What European witch has managed to seduce my son?" I took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would change everything irreversibly. "It's not a woman, father. It's a man. His name is Diego, and I love him more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." The silence that followed was so profound that I thought the call had dropped. When my father finally spoke, his voice was charged with a coldness that cut me like a blade. "You are no longer my son. You are no longer an al-Rashid. Consider yourself banned from the family, disowned of all titles and properties. There is no more Prince Khalil. There is only a man who chose dishonor over duty." "Father, please," I began, but he cut me off. "Don't call me again. Don't come home. For all intents and purposes, you died today." The line went dead. I looked at the phone in my hands, realizing that I had just cut all the threads that connected me to the life I knew. I should have been terrified, devastated, regretful. Instead, I felt a strange lightness, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Diego watched me with a mix of admiration and concern. "¿Qué acabas de hacer, mi amor?" "I just got reborn," I replied, pulling him into a tight hug. "I just chose love over fear, truth over convenience, happiness over duty." We called Mahmoud, who received the news with surprise, but not with judgment. "What do you want me to do, Your Highness?" he asked respectfully. "I'm no longer Your Highness," I replied. "I'm just Khalil, and you are free from your obligations. Go home, tell my father. Tell him I made my choice." Mahmoud was silent for a moment before speaking. "Khalil," he said, using my name without a title for the first time in 10 years. "I wish you happiness, true happiness." The months that followed were the most challenging and simultaneously the most rewarding of my life. I learned to live without fortunes, without servants, without the safety net that royal privilege had provided. Diego helped me find work as a translator, leveraging my command of multiple languages. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And for the first time in my life, every cent I earned was the result of my own effort. I moved into Diego's small apartment in the Albaicin, where we learned to navigate the daily intimacy of a shared life. I discovered that I loved waking up to the smell of coffee he made in the mornings, adored listening to him hum while he cooked, and delighted in our late-night conversations where we planned simple futures full of possibilities. There were difficult moments, of course. Nights when I missed the financial security, when the reality of having lost my family hit me like a wave. But Diego was always there, reminding me that family isn't just who shares your blood, but who chooses to love you unconditionally. "Te arrepientes?" he asked one night, 6 months after my choice, as we lay in the narrow bed we shared. "Never," I replied without hesitation. For the first time in my life, I'm living my own story, not the story others wrote for me. 2 years passed before I truly understood the magnitude of the transformation I had undergone. I was working as a tour guide alongside Diego, discovering that I had a passion for sharing history and culture with curious visitors. My royal experience gave me unique perspectives on the connections between different civilizations, and I was surprised to find that I was good at making other people fall in love with Granada as much as I had. One afternoon, while showing the Alhambra to a group of American tourists, a woman asked me about my own story. "You talk about this place with so much passion," she said. "Are you a native of Granada?" "No," I replied, looking at the towers that had witnessed my transformation. "I came from very far away. But sometimes, to find your true home, you have to get completely lost first." Diego, who was working with another group nearby, heard me and smiled. That night, in our secret garden that we had turned into our special place to celebrate anniversaries and important milestones, he asked me about my reflection. "Khalil," he said, pouring local wine into simple glasses, "really do you believe that you got lost to find yourself?" I thought carefully before answering. "My father always taught me 3 fundamental duties," I began. "To honor the family, to serve the people, and to build a lasting legacy." "Why?" Diego encouraged, intrigued. "I realized I'm fulfilling all 3, I said, smiling. "You've become my true family. I honor you every day by choosing to be authentic. I serve the people I guide. helping them discover beauty and history. And my legacy. My legacy is to prove that it's possible to choose love over fear, courage over conformity. Diego leaned in and kissed me gently. Eres el hombre más valiente que conozco, he whispered. No, I corrected. I'm just a man who finally learned the difference between existing and living. Today, when I wake up in the small apartment we share, when I hear Diego humming in the kitchen, when I see the sun rising over the mountains that surround Granada, I feel a deep gratitude for having had the courage to jump into the unknown. I lost a kingdom, but I gained a world. I lost a title, but I gained an identity. I lost a family that loved me conditionally, but I gained a love that accepts me completely. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories, with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. If this story of courage and true love touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell to not miss any of our next stories about people who chose authenticity over convenience. Share in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between security and happiness? What sacrifices would you make for true love? And remember, sometimes to find who you really are, you have to be brave enough to get completely lost first. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring stories of transformation and personal discovery. Hasta la vista.